Hello, welcome to the latest Safer West Mercia podcast. My name is John Campion and I'm the West Mercia Police and Crime Commissioner. I'm joined today by guests who I'll get to introduce themselves.
Good morning, my name is Tony Garner. I'm a DCI on the Specialist Operations team.
Excellent, so that's with West Mercia Police?
That's right, yeah.
And DCI, just for those that might not know the acronym?
So that's Detective Chief Inspector.
Excellent. Yeah. So in your current role, which is what we're going to talk about in today's podcast, you certainly fulfil all those criteria, I think, in terms of quite I was going to say specialist, but it's not in terms of it isn't a small issue in our society. What we're going to talk about is quite a big thing, but it's quite a specialist skill set that I think that you lead for West Mercia Police. And do you want to just say a little bit more about what it is your role currently involves?
Yeah, so the current role, I've got responsibility for West Mercia's cyber team, economic crime, which looks at fraud and financial investigation. I've got the Force's online child sexual exploitation teams, and some of the digital investigation responsibility for the Force. So yeah, it's quite a sort of broad and varied role.
Because that non-traditional role of the police in terms of the more traditional Pelian heritage of the police is physical harm to somebody else, isn't it? You know, I am harming you here, but that digital element of how technology actually not only is the great supporter of information and our freedoms, but it's also an area that can cause us harm as well. And for us in policing, it's definitely a catch-up, isn't it, in terms of the pace of technology and us being able to keep pace with keeping people safe, or helping keep people safe in that space.
Yeah, I mean, I think this difference between the physical world and the online world is a bit of a misconception. I think the vast majority of the work that my teams do relates to physical harm that is enabled by technology and the internet. So I think it's really important to remember, but behind all of it, normally it results in physical harm and sometimes some quite, some very significant harm to people.
Because of that contention of somebody's viewing something on their digital device, mm-hmm. and they're disconnecting the fact actually there is a victim, potentially behind either what they're seeing or involved in. That just because they're not physically in that location doesn't mean to say that the harm isn't happening. And I think that's important that some of the perpetrators are involved in some of this work. It's not a victimless activity. Mm-hmm. There is a victim at the centre of it.
Yeah, I mean that anonymity that the internet creates is a big challenge investigatively, and as you say, it disinhibits people. So people think that they can get away with things that they wouldn't do in the physical world, and ultimately that's not the case. I think the public often think that the internet is a sort of completely anonymous area where the police don't have any idea what's going on, and that's not the case, as maybe we'll discuss with some of the other areas of my business, and we're very proactively into those spaces.
One of the areas that the Force quite rightly has had focus on is around child sexual exploitation, and your area about the online element to that. Do you think that that is an issue that is growing in our society, or does it feel like we're just more aware of it? Do you think there is a sea change in the prevalence of it?
So there is a sea change in the volume of it coming through to us to investigate. That's a fact. But the cause of that, I don't know, and I don't think the academics know either. It's a really important question. It could be that as a law enforcement community, private industry, we're getting better at detecting it and reporting it and taking it more seriously. Or it could be that it's the internet itself is fueling and increasing this problem. The one area where I do have some quite strong sort of views on is young people. I do think it's actually fueling criminality, right, and some of this harm with young people and their exposure to some sort of extreme content in their younger years.
Because that's some of the things that I've, as Commissioner, try to do with partners and others, is around that preventative work early on with young people about healthy relationships, understanding as they start to explore their sexuality, actually what they should be expecting of their partners as they enter adulthood, and are actually around some of the imagery or the extreme nature of some of the content that they might be able to quite easily access, isn't the reality to which they should be enjoying, and that positivity, that positive expectation of a relationship, quite key to some of it. But that wider access that society's got now to the absolute extremes of some of the things we're talking about today is quite scary, I think. And I can't imagine being a parent trying to navigate a young person who would start to get access to the internet in their teenage years at this level. It must be incredibly difficult then, and then you guys as the police having to intervene when it has gone wrong and investigate and support the victims, but also bring the perpetrators to justice. An incredibly complex societal problem manifesting itself at your door.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one of the reasons why I was really keen to sort of do this podcast. I feel a burning need to speak to parents, teachers, social workers, and we've done some work around that already, but we've got a lot more to do, because ultimately parents, I don't think, know how to tackle this, which is fair enough. They've not been through it themselves.
And they also might not know the technology, understand the technology.
Yeah, I think the technology is less the problem. People think it is, but what we need is good old-fashioned common sense on parenting. Parents to have the confidence to have conversations with their children, because at the moment it's been described by some as a very scary experiment that society is going through. We've got our first generation of young people start to reach adulthood, who have had unfettered, complete access to extreme material. So their sexual development, their sexual experimentation, everyone goes through. They've gone through it in some pretty horrific, horrible online spaces. And it's not just the nature of the content they're seeing, it's the nature of the delivery. So you've got the algorithms that are designed to make it more and more and more compelling and hook them in. So some quite harmful activity, I think.
What would you... So, and that's a really interesting part around the equipping parents with the wherewithal or carers to support their young person in the right way. That's a real... If there was a parent listening today who might have a child that's entering into their early teens where this is happening, what would be your central part of your advice to them?
Yeah, my central part would be to not see the online world as different from the offline world. So whatever you're doing in the physical world with your child, talking about who they're meeting, checking where they're going, depending on their age, obviously these things sort of tighten or relax, but try and apply the same to online. So you would never let a primary school age child go and spend a day mixing with complete strangers on the other side of the world. Yet a lot of parents are allowing their children because they just don't feel confident enough to get proactive and get involved. So that would be that's the fundamental bit of advice. Don't see it just as tech that they're not in touch and don't understand. It's too important and too central to children's lives now. They've got to get involved in it. Because
it's the attitude to approaching it rather than knowing what they're doing every moment. If they've got the confidence actually their behaviours are right, then actually they don't need to. Yeah, and it must be like all things growing up. There's always some experimenting, some exploring boundaries, isn't there? But it's how that's done safely, and it's no different whether it's physically or online, is it? Yeah. In terms of detecting it, in terms of the going after the people who are exploiting the perpetrating, what do you think's the thing that we as a society need to do? Is it more resources? Is it tech? What is it in terms of the thing that we need to do to be more successful? We've heard a bit about the role that the parents and carers might have in the young people, but what actually else do you think there is around getting those offenders?
Yeah, I think first of all we need to do what we're doing now. So we need to explain what's going on because people don't understand. And then fundamentally it's down to the public to decide how important they think that activity is. We've got lots of competing priorities that we hear about, often in the news around, say, burglary, drug dealing, antisocial behaviour. You don't often hear around online child sexual exploitation. The reality is that those people who are committing offences online, it can be a journey. So they can start off by viewing indecent images of children, so sexualised images of children. They can then start chatting to them in chat rooms, and they can then move on to physically meeting them and committing physical child sexual abuse. And the objective of our teams, of the police, is to intervene before we get to that physical harm. So if you remember right at the beginning, it's all about the physical harm. We're trying to intervene. And the way I look at it is, society, for as long as we go back and we've got sort of documented history, there's always been adults who've had sexual interest in children. It just seems to be part of humanity that we have this problem. But for the first time ever as a society, we now have intelligence about who those people are. So really accurate, timely intelligence comes into us as a police force from our partners in the National Crime Agency, GCHQ, private industry, telling us who the individuals who live in West Mercia are who have a sexual interest in children. So for the first time, we get that opportunity to go in there, safeguard the children, mark them up effectively as posing a potential risk on the sex offenders register. And we're breaking that cycle of child abuse, which, if you think about how we've done our policing previously, we've really had to wait until the child sexual abuse has started and it's reported to us, and then we then go and intervene. We don't get our informants in the pub telling us that Grandpa Joe's starting to have a sexual interest in his child, but we do online. So I believe very passionately that it's a new opportunity as a society to tackle what is probably the most abhorrent, worst crime, sexual violence against children. But if we can put more resources into it, we'd have to do something less.
Because you chair in West Mercia the West Mercia Cybercrime Partnership, is that correct?
That's correct.
And it is this organisation's encompassing approach to trying to deal with harm online, and it is obviously focused on things like child sexual exploitation, but it is much wider than that, isn't it, in terms of the mission of the areas of crime? Because it's often as well that it's unlike there's just one crime type in a certain series of offending. There'll be others as well, isn't there? Yeah. So what other areas do they also focus on, or do your teams focus on? So
the partnership started off with bringing together private industry, some of our partners, local councils, police, to look specifically at cybercrime, looking really more around the harm to business of things like ransomware attacks, DDoS.
DDoS is denial of service. It's when somebody literally can attack an organisation by paralysing them and stopping them being able to function.
That's right. Yeah. But it's clear, as you sort of said in that question, that you can't really put these things in sort of separate pots. So we're in the process of broadening that out to include any harm that is enabled by technology. It's really quite broad. So we're looking at fraud, we're looking at scams, cybercrime, child exploitation, and the vision is to have conferences where we try and get several hundred people online and in person involved, and where we share some of our observations and look to do some better partnership work. So we'd like to get teachers, nurses, youth workers.
The whole system, as it were.
The whole system needs to come together on it.
Because some of your work that you alluded to around economic crime, and economic crime is sometimes seen as not victimless because there is a victim, but it's not that terrible, is it, that somebody loses some money? But we've had some quite horrific cases in West Mercia of people being defrauded, through cybercrime, to which they've lost their life savings. There's all kinds of terrible outcomes, aren't there, from online economic crime, and that's again an area that your team focuses on in terms of not only raising awareness but also chasing down those that are perpetrating.
Yeah, that's right. So historically, I would say economic crime has had less resources for the reasons you say. Police decision makers, they'll look and they'll see some risk of physical harm. So maybe there's a risk that somebody's going to get stabbed linked to drug dealing, or there's a risk around a sex offender, and the resources go there, which is understandable. However, technology has sort of supercharged fraud and scams, and it's becoming, when it's looked at as a whole, it's becoming a real significant problem.
And they're quite sophisticated as well, aren't they? In terms of I had a text message supposedly from a parcel company saying, "Oh, we've attempted to deliver your parcel today. We haven't been able to. Click this link to rebook." And I nearly clicked the link. And I thought, "Oh, actually, I haven't got I'm not expecting a parcel," but it looked really, really genuine.
Yeah. I mean, there's some very bright entrepreneurial people committing these offences with some very good understanding of psychology and social engineering. It's fairly impressive what some of them are doing. But just going back to why should we be bothered about it? Over half of all crime now in the UK is fraud and cyber. So that's a jaw-dropping figure when we think about it. And yet, on the other hand, only 1% of police resources nationally, it's a very broad estimate, is invested in tackling it for the reasons you've outlined at the beginning. So there's a massive mismatch there. And the impact of it, you talked about the individual suffering of people losing their life savings. There are some horrific stories there where people have worked their whole life and they've lost their pension pots, they've lost their houses, it's led to people taking their own lives. The other angle to look at is it's funding organised crime.
As in, that fraud isn't just their only criminal activity, there are many others.
That's right, so the organised crime gangs are moving into organised crime. Terrorism is largely funded by fraud. And it's been described as a tax on all of us and a drag on the UK economy to the point where the government have escalated it as a threat alongside terrorism. It's a tier 1 security threat to the UK now. With one estimate I read recently, it was 190 billion a year.
Wow. That
it actually hits the UK as an economy, as a country. So, if it's 53% of all crime, then we risk a lawless society unless we really start getting stuck into it. And that's starting to happen.
So the pursue bit, the chasing down, absolutely I get. A big part of reducing the incidence is about prevention as well, isn't it? And I happened to be listening to commercial radio yesterday, and there was an advert around a warning about pension scams that you just referred to, i.e., be wary of if somebody is offering you that pension service, and there was a website to check as to whether they're a bona fide service or not. Prevention's got to be at the heart of how we tackle this as well, not just pursuing, and some of the work of your teams is in that space. That's right. Yeah, I mean, I think traditionally policing, we like to go after offenders and investigate, but with fraud, we know it's estimated a third of it is coming from abroad, and some of that threat from abroad, those countries won't speak to us because of political issues. But even the threat that's coming from within the UK, it's often hidden behind anonymity sometimes. So you're absolutely right. The key to this is protecting, and in fact, it's almost tantalising, because if the people just took maybe 10-15 minutes of time to protect themselves, a lot of this harm could be prevented. So we could see a real significant drop in crime as a community if we're a little bit more... Because we're hurtling towards a new phenomenon, relative new phenomenon of Black Friday, aren't there? Where we have these huge, great big sales, and a big part of them are online. And there is an instinct in all of us to like a bargain, isn't there? But that curiosity about, actually, is that a real? Is that bargain too good to be true? Has got to be part of our challenge to us to be safe. Consumers, to ensuring that we also are taking the right steps to prevent ourselves being victim of fraud. Here in West Mercia, we work with lots of different partners, etc. If those listening to the podcast wanted some more information about how to keep themselves safe online, etc., where would you suggest they went to go and find it? I think simply go to West Mercia's website. West Mercia Police's website. If you just put into the search box fraud or cyber, you'll get lots of information there. There's a lot to help out there. Fundamentally, though, we just need people to be a lot more suspicious, unfortunately. So everything they touch, you don't trust anything digital or online. If that's your start point, that's a good start point. There's lots of technical advice that you can get online, but fundamentally, every click, just think what you're doing and never be rushed.
because there's no legitimate organisation out there, no bank, no police force that's going to rush you. So as soon as you feel rushed, it's a big warning sign, and that's their main tactic, is to rush you. So there's a campaign, it's called Take 5. So the primary bit of advice is if you're feeling a bit, rely on your gut, and if something's not quite right, just take 5. Literally, step away from the computer, go make a cup of tea, maybe give somebody a call, and then reassess it, and that would make a big difference.
That's quite a very simple bit of advice, but quite a powerful piece in terms of actually just if it doesn't quite feel right, just have a step back and have a reflect, and that part of whether it be actually a police officer who will always welcome having their identity checked, the same with any bona fide organisation, would they? So if somebody's not willing or doesn't seem to be willing to prove what it is they're either saying or asserting who they are, then those are when the antennae should go up, isn't it? To say actually what is wrong here. Yeah.
So I never engage with somebody who contacts me if it's something personal like the banking details. I'd always contact them on my own terms, because then I know who I'm speaking to.
And that's the only way, isn't it, to take control?
It's the only way. They're so clever now. They can sort of fake the web address. They can fake the telephone number that text messages come from. Yeah.
Which is all quite extraordinary, isn't it? Because we're quite trusting, I think, as humans. But that dialing up that bit of scepticism actually could be one of the biggest steps we can take to keep ourselves safe.
It is, and it's a mindset shift, because in the physical world, our intuition's really quite can be quite effective at whether to trust somebody or not. But online it doesn't work, because you can't look into someone's eyes, you can't read their body language.
I was going to say you can't sense, whether or not.
No, absolutely not. So basically, my advice: don't trust anyone online.
Did one of the questions we often ask those that take part in the podcast, if you were PCC for a day, was there something you would do? Obviously, limited to what you can do in a day, but what would be the focus that you'd want to take?
Yeah, I was once one was coming. It feels a tricky question, because the reality is I've been doing this job long enough to know, until you get into somebody's shoes, you've got to be careful of sort of making sweeping decisions. But I think, if I was PCC, I reflected, and I think probably the most important challenge I see at the moment is, how can we as a police force get back to doing the core role of policing, which I think is what the public wants, and it's what police want to do. And I read a really interesting article yesterday that estimated that 84% of the calls into the police, this is nationally, not just West Mercia, are non-crime related.
Yep.
Unfortunately, I haven't got any answers to that question, but for me, that's the fundamental problem we face at the moment. I feel that we've gone into areas that really probably belong to some of our partners, and as a result, we're struggling to do some of the basic things. And this is a national challenge, not just a West Mercia.
So your one area that you do in the day that you got the raise was probably the biggest challenge that faces modern policing.
Yeah.
Because I do think it is an important part of what we've got to do with our community and the police service, is ensure that contract, that relationship between is honest and understood. Because I absolutely agree with you, the police do have a safety net role, but it can't be. Everything can't be in the safety net, can it? Because it's not a true safety net otherwise. That's really interesting, because some of the bits that we've talked about today are important and the most impactful of crime and harm being caused, but it's not always in the public priority, is it? So how we balance to ensure that we've got enough resources to deal with that, I think really important, and ensuring the system, the wider system of keeping people safe, whether it be health service and non-crime related partners, I think really important, because otherwise there's no other agency, is there, dealing with your particular kind of work in terms of that local pursuit of and safeguarding of individuals online.
That's right. There's a certain work that only the police can do, and for me that should be our focus.
You pick a big one, Tony, if I'm being honest, or
I think one of the key things is things like this. I realise more and more as I get more experience that there is a disconnect, inevitably, I suppose, between what we're seeing day to day in policing and what the public understand. And as
because I bet they wouldn't say 50% of crime being fraud.
No, and if you say, right, online child sex exploitation or burglary dwelling, what's more important? Yeah. They would probably choose burglary dwelling because they might not understand that actually online child sex exploitation is going to prevent children being physically abused. So it's
how we support our community, isn't it, to be good citizens and informed citizens about their priority. I'm really grateful for you talking today around some of the area of work that you do for our communities across West Mercia. And you and your team do a really challenging role in quite a it's a specialist in terms of technical work, but actually the volume that we've talked about today actually a reminder that actually all of our communities in West Mercia, it's impinging on lives, or most people's lives, more than we perhaps think it is. And I'm really grateful for you and your team for work, not only doing it, of course, but talking about it today in the podcast. If there are people at home who have been listening to today's podcast, and either around some of the those that might be victims to the behaviours that we've heard about, there is help out there. Either if you put into your search engine West Mercia PCC or West Mercia Police, there are links on there as to how to get help if you think you might be a victim to some of the issues that we've talked about, or might need some more general help. And otherwise, as Tony's alluded to, there is a huge amount of preventative advice out there. West Mercia Police and West Mercia PCC are some areas where you can get some advice, but there are loads of other areas to where places like Action Fraud and other links that are on both of our websites that will be able to give people's advice if they wanted some other preventions. But the key bit of advice I've heard at the end in terms of prevention was about, if it doesn't feel right, then that 5-minute step back, have a think, and just a sense check might be absolutely the difference between being a victim of fraud or indeed harm online than not being. So really great bit of advice, and thank you for joining us today.
Oh, you're welcome.
And thank you for listening.